Rhaenyra Targaryen has to be the most interesting Targaryen in that family's entire history. She was born when the family was at the peak of its power, placed in a position to potentially inherit that power, and ended up becoming one of the main reasons that the family lost that power as well. It's not a coincidence that Daenerys Targaryen is seen as the other side of the coin on which Rhaenyra too appears, because Dany brought dragons back to life, but Rhaenyra is arguably the reason they died, and a big reason behind that is her downfall as queen. So, in this video, we'll be breaking down every factor that contributed to Rhaenyra's fall as queen, exploring its impact on House Targaryen in detail. Spoiler warning. Now, let's get right into it.
I seize Tumbleton. He dares me to rain fire down on a seat that raised my banner.
She never fully consolidates her power. Right off the bat, Rhaenyra Targaryen makes a big mistake, both in the show and the books, when she fails to consolidate her power directly. It's a lot more evident in the books, because there, she's practically a nominal figurehead of her own war effort. The show has given Rhaenyra a lot more agency, because many of the decisions she makes in both Season 2 and Season 3, like naming Corlys Hand and sending her sons to the Vale and then Pentos, were made by her son Jacaerys. As a queen, Rhaenyra Targaryen was expected to know her lords and ladies, and more importantly, know exactly which buttons to push to get them to behave how she wanted them to behave. At the beginning of the war, Rhaenyra's immediate power is negligible compared to the Greens. She has the support of Dragonstone's sworn houses and some of the houses from the Crown Lands, whose maximum military output is significantly lower than the High Towers. She sends emissaries out to treat with the Great Lords, but she makes a mistake in sending her son Lucerys to Storm's End. Had Rhaenyra paid attention to the things that happened within her realm, she might have heard rumors that Lord Boros Baratheon is an overproud man, and sent Rhaenys instead of Luke to treat with him. Their familial connection and Rhaenys' political smarts could have ended the war a lot sooner, but sadly foresight has always been an issue for Rhaenyra. Even when she gets to King's Landing, she doesn't think far enough ahead to secure a line of credit or a supply train to keep the city fed and flaccid to violence. Instead, she resorts to a different tactic, which we'll speak of in just a few minutes. While it's true that ultimately 4.5 of the 7 kingdoms rise up for Rhaenyra, the delays that 2 of those kingdoms make in sending troops to the war effort, and the fact that Daemon secures the 3rd and most important one for her, implies that Rhaenyra never really bothered consolidating her power base and setting her affairs in order. The fact that Jace did most of the wheeling and dealing at Dragonstone, while she grieved Luke's loss in the books, is worse than her decisions from the show. But her decisions from the show can be summed up with the words, "I will go." While at first she demonstrates an admirable amount of restraint, soon enough Rhaenyra wants to rush into things without thinking them through, in which she's exactly like her half-brother. The fact that her first day in office as queen plays out nearly identically to Aegon's first day as king is highly indicative of just how good either of them are going to turn out as monarchs. And the reason behind that is neither of them stop and think things through long enough to consolidate their positions. Their first instinct is to react with fire and blood. Even Daemon doesn't do that all the time because, yeah, he's impulsive, but he's also experienced enough to actually come up with a plan and stick with it. In fact, without him, Rhaenyra wouldn't have a leg to stand on in either medium because he's ultimately the one who raises her most important military force. Plus, Rhaenyra's supporters are primarily from areas that take things like oaths and honor more seriously than their southern counterparts, thanks to their First Men descent. She completely loses out on the richest and most militarily powerful kingdoms. And speaking of military, let's talk about her mind for planning. Her plans are reactionary, not strategic. This might have been evident from the way she accepted Alicent's plea for peace, but Rhaenyra Targaryen isn't exactly a military mastermind. All of her military campaigns are built upon suggestions from others, and sometimes even her diplomatic strategies come from her advisors. In the books, this is a lot more evident because Daemon is named Lord Protector, and he controls her armies in her name. In the show, Rhaenyra is both Queen and Protector, and that means that all her forces are hers directly to command. Daemon heading to the Riverlands contingent was contingent on his loyalty to her, because she technically appointed him as her war general. But that might have been the only time Rhaenyra put any thought into making a decision, because the aggregate of her decisions have tended to lean towards being reactionary, not strategic. Any leader that slaps their counselors because they can't endure their nagging is always going to be perceived as an impatient leader, irrespective of their sex. And Rhaenyra doesn't seem to realize that her gender isn't as much of a problem as her incompetency is. When Luke dies, Rhaenyra returns to Dragonstone and demands Aemon's head. When Daemon accidentally gets Aegon's son killed instead, she wishes to make peace but fails. So she decides she needs more dragon riders after a suggestion made by her son. But then Mysaria suggests she gives the bastards the right to ride those dragons, without fully considering the long-term consequences of such an act. She also doesn't come up with the idea to send food to King's Landing. That's a reaction to Mysaria's advice. Even the attack on King's Landing is reactionary because she only decides to do it after Daemon forces her to consider the alternatives. And pretty much everything from her first time sitting in court as queen shows you that she can only counter the problems put in front of her. Her idea to be free to marry Daemon almost sounds like a morbid prank. She gets Rhaenyra to fake his death and takes the silent blame for it because, once again, she's reacting to her needs instead of planning how to get what she wants. Rhaenyra distributing food to the small folk and serving nobles rats while she seizes their wealth sounds like a benevolent act on paper, but a truly smart ruler would know that this is just a half measure, and one that can backfire incredibly easy. The feudal system itself is built upon nobility holding to their lands, titles, and wealth, so that they become the drivers of economy. Rhaenyra's power move is so disrespectful that she's made herself a banquet table full of enemies, and it's only going to get worse from here. She doesn't think of the optics of her decision, she doesn't think of the long-term consequences, she's acting the way she is because she believes it's her ordained right to be queen, and that kind of mindset can easily alienate you from the very people whose support you desperately need. In Rhaenyra's mind, she's righteous, but in reality, she's not grasping the full scope of her actions. And that's because they're not actions, they're reactions. Speaking of which, her reaction to one of the most basic aspects of ruling pretty much foreshadowed her downfall in clear terms, which is, she inherited a beggared treasury. One of Rhaenyra's biggest issues after taking King's Landing is money, which eventually becomes the direct trigger of her downfall. Before the dance, House Targaryen's royal treasury was full of gold. They were allied with some of the strongest and richest houses of the realm after all. The Valerians, the richest house, were tied to the Targaryens through Corlys's marriage to Rhaenyra's to Laenor, and Daemon's to Laena. Viserys' marriage to Alicent brought House Hightower directly into the royal fold, and they're said to be almost as rich and powerful as the Lannisters. Tywin Lannister served on the King's Council, his twin Jason being the Lord of Castle Rock. And even House Strong propped up the royal treasury, considering Harrenhal's estates were vast and fertile. But when the war broke out, all the actual material wealth of House Targaryen, minus the Valyrian treasures, remained in King's Landing, which means that the Greens had complete control of it. The Blacks could now only rely upon the wealth of House Velaryon, tied to them through the betrothals of Rhaenyra's eldest sons to Daemon's daughters through Laenor. The blockade of the Gullet was a nifty enough idea, but what she should have done was commandeered Corlys's wealth as a substitute for the royal treasury, promising to pay him back after the war was done, and moving all his gold from High Tide and Driftmark to Dragonstone. When Aegon the Conqueror took Westeros, he'd leave his first two foes their property, but seize all their wealth to augment his forces. Those lords went on to become his fiercest supporters because the king presumably made them whole after the conquest, and one of them even became the Conqueror's hand. Rhaenyra's lack of foresight when it comes to finance meant that when High Tide was burnt and sacked, the Blacks lost all their wealth as well. This made them dependent on the treasury in King's Landing, but the Greens had thought ahead. They split their wealth into four, sent 3/4 away from the capital to loyal strongholds, and used the fourth to pay for sellswords, presumably the Triarchy as well. They knew that even if Rhaenyra takes King's Landing, she won't be able to hold it for too long after the Valyrian fleet is smashed and the treasury is drained. And that's exactly what happens. By far, the biggest reason Rhaenyra isn't able to retain control of King's Landing for more than 6 months is because she raises taxes. On Bartimaeus Celtigar's advice, she keeps increasing the taxes that the small folk need to pay to keep the city running. And after a certain point, things spill into open revolts and rioting. Rhaenyra didn't anticipate her enemies would beggar her when that's the most basic thing to do in a war such as this. The moment she lost High Tide and its riches was the moment her downfall truly began. Because without money, Rhaenyra couldn't keep anyone happy. And unhappy populations are the most dangerous things for rulers with shaky authority. The capital itself was working against her. This one's a bit difficult to fully quantify because the thing is, as of now, it's only confirmed in the books. But Rhaenyra's actions, when it comes to taxes and other matters of administration, only accelerate the process of turning the capital against her. And we'll now explain what we mean by all this. In the books, it's implied that after Larys Strong spirited Aegon to Dragonstone, he returned to King's Landing and launched a shadow war against Rhaenyra, using his network of spies and informants to sow dissent against her and prime the populace for violence. We know this to be true because at the end of the rioting he incites, Larys takes control of the Red Keep, and Aegon is nowhere near King's Landing. Suffice it to say, he used his network to accelerate Rhaenyra's downfall, which was already put into motion by her tax policy. And this involved several agents working within the walls of the capital. In fact, we might have seen one of them already, because the Hightower Guard with heterochromia that adds his voice to Alicent's when it comes to surrender might be Sir Perkin the Flea. Perkin is known as an agent of Larys the Strong, and the show has already cemented the Flea as Larys' personal sigil. There's also that jailer who gifts Daemon with Otto Hightower, so we've already seen 2 of Larys' agents. Plus, the Red Keep has been overrun by rats, and many speculate that Larys is a skin changer who wargs into rats. Whether that's true or not, it doesn't change the fact that he has a commanding presence within King's Landing, and he's planned 50 steps ahead, making Rhaenyra the one dancing to his tune. Larys' Shadow War essentially puts him in charge of King's Landing, because the small folk are the many and the nobility are the few, and ultimately, the many trample over the few. That's just the rule of nature. And so, when you put together Rhaenyra's policies and Larys' Shadow War against her, you understand why we're claiming that the capital itself works towards her downfall. She made an enemy of the faith. This one comes a bit out of left field in the books, but in the show, the justification for it has already been established. Westerosi society is built upon 2 broad pillars, the crown and the faith. Yes, there are several micro-dynamics that define it as well, but the crown and the faith unite the kingdom by dividing administration and faith between them and holding each other accountable. At least that's how it's supposed to be. But the faith's relationship with House Targaryen has always been tenuous, because the faith sees them as abominable aliens and yet they possess dragons. The faith tried rebelling against Aenys I and Maegor II, and had enough support to keep a conflict going for over a decade. They'd have continued their war had Jaehaerys not used some insane diplomacy to reach the settlement that established the crown and the faith as the 2 pillars. But whenever the faith smells that the House of the Dragon's End is close, it always reverts to its original doctrine. And the fact that Rhaenyra has just antagonized its High Septon, who is essentially the man who speaks with the voice of God, has now turned one pillar against the other. Yeah, it is true that the High Septon's refusal to appoint Rhaenyra queen stems from deep-rooted patriarchal views, but he's also correct in saying that he can't anoint one monarch when the other's living status is indeterminate, and he correctly points out that Rhaenyra is lying to get what she wants. Rhaenyra has often lied to get what she wants, and she doesn't get those things because she's a good liar. She gets those things because she's royalty. So this might be the first time that someone with power and authority independent of her sphere of influence has stood up to her. And her response is annoyance and anger. She doesn't fully appreciate the extent to which her rude dismissal of the High Septon is going to backfire on her, because ultimately, all of King's Landing worships the faith of the Seven. In the books, Rhaenyra doesn't even have to go that far to earn the enmity of the faith's adherents, because a priest called the Shepherd riled up King's Landing with talk of cleansing the city of its dragons to avoid a doom similar to Valeria's. Whether he was an agent of Larys Strong, an agent of the faith, or a genuinely disgruntled and insane man as the book suggests, the Shepherd wore the trappings of the faith, so many other followers of the faith ended up becoming instigators of the riot of King's Landing. In fact, the Shepherd's followers were one of the 3 factions controlling the city after Rhaenyra's downfall, and the fact that she has dissed the High Septon in the show clearly is meant to be a setup for this. If she were smart, she'd have followed her great-grandfather's example and worked on reconciling the faith to her rule. Instead, her obsession with formalized legitimacy makes her an enemy of the faith, and she's too blind to see the mistakes she's plainly making. We're sure if you ask her, she'll say that it was the faith that broke faith with her, and that's just not true. But it also explains another aspect of her personality that contributes to her downfall greatly, and that is, she became hard on treason and rewards. A good king knows when to be just and when to be merciful. A good king knows not to act before they have all the pertinent information available to them. A good king makes allies of enemies and sends forever enemies out of sight, because out of sight is out of mind. But Rhaenyra doesn't have these qualities, and most importantly, she's not even a king, which is the whole problem. Rhaenyra's claim is rejected by those parts of society where male primogeniture is protected as fiercely as their lives. To win them over, she has to show them that she's better than a man, because being as good as one won't be good enough. Rhaenyra's claim is revolutionary. If she's allowed to take the throne, she needs to set an example. And that means she basically needs to be a second Jaehaerys the Conciliator. Out of all the Targaryen kings, Jaehaerys had the most level-headed policy on dealing with belligerent and rebellious lords. When he overthrew his uncle Maegor, he spared his loyalist nobles after taking lands and ransoms from them. But he punished his uncle's Kingsguard for betraying their oaths not once, but twice. Jaehaerys would often fight his trial by combats himself, but he spent several years training to become a warrior, whereas Rhaenyra can't even swing a sword. Jaehaerys reconciled the faith with the crown and gave the Seven Kingdoms 50 years of peace, whereas Rhaenyra's claim has only brought fire and blood to the realm. So all eyes are on her when it comes to how she deals with those who once betrayed her. Mercy is an important quality for a ruler to possess, but Rhaenyra's hard-on treason and rewards policy after assuming the throne made her hard to back in any capacity. She pardoned the lords who sided with Aegon under pressure, sure, but when she was betrayed by Ulf and Hugh, she became so paranoid that she wanted both Adam and Nettles dead. And in the show, that'll become even more complicated because she doesn't know who rides Sheepstealer, and she'll basically be ordering the death of her own stepdaughter. Even before this, one of Rhaenyra's first acts as queen is to send out Knights Inquisitor to bring Aegon back to her. And these Inquisitors pile up heads during their inquiries among the small folk of King's Landing. She's brutal to those she perceives as having betrayed her, and she doesn't give openly to those who have served her. That's why Ulf and Hugh betray her in the first place. This probably isn't going to happen in the show, but in the books, Daemon actually advises Rhaenyra to make them lords. He suggests that they should be given Castle Rock and Storm's End after the Lannisters and Baratheons are rooted out of their keeps for their loyalty. Daemon's suggestion was also a strategic deterrent in a way, because he knew better than Rhaenyra that raising two bastards to Great Lord status was a necessary sacrifice. These were men who never had power before they were bonded with two of the largest dragons in the world. Now, they could burn the Seven Kingdoms and crown themselves if they wanted to, but make them great lords and suddenly you have loyal dragon riders in 3 of the 7 kingdoms. But in the show, you can tell that even knighting them was but a chore to Rhaenyra, and she refuses to legitimize Adam of Hull, which means that she doesn't trust even her most loyal bastard soldier. Rhaenyra later tells Corlys that she's worried about the optics of such a legitimization, but when he openly asks her why her son should be treated differently than his own, she has no answer for him. The truth is, as inept as Rhaenyra was in the books, she wasn't an involved figure in her own civil war until she reached the capital. In the show, she's been at the center of all the decisions that her faction's been making, and her refusing to reward loyalty and instead pursuing iron justice for treachery sets a dangerous precedent. It means that even loyalty won't be rewarded by her if she has other plans in mind, and treachery will be punished from the moment she sniffs it out. Such rulers rarely inspire much loyalty beyond honor and oaths, and honor and oaths don't keep all mouths fed. Most men want to work willingly for those they trust to look out for their interests, but Rhaenyra only ever looks out for her own interests. That's the earliest and clearest alarm bell the series rings with regards to her eventual downfall. Successful and industrious kings know how to knit together alliances and relationships, but Rhaenyra does not. Her first instinct is to approach things with a closed fist, not an open hand, and that's the kind of quality that makes a king or a queen fall out of favor with their people rather quickly. Her succession was never fully secure. This is perhaps the most important aspect of Rhaenyra's downfall because, while she denied the illegitimacy of her oldest 3 children, many of the realm simply didn't believe her. The fact is, the Greens took a more propaganda-based approach to the war, and they sent letters to the entire realm claiming Rhaenyra's children were baseborn. While many followed Jace into battle and sealed their alliances with him in the books, Jace also acted like a proper promising prince there. In the show, he was pouty, and his decision to enter the Battle of the Gullet was as impulsive as his mother's before him. If Jace had survived the battle and continued making good decisions, the question of his illegitimacy might have been put to rest eventually after the Blacks took the throne. But Jace's death made Joffrey Rhaenyra's heir, and Larys Strong's shadow war against her must have included the illegitimacy of her first 3 sons as fuel for the riots that eventually broke out. But even if Rhaenyra's first 3 sons were legitimate, they would still create a succession crisis, because the question would then become whether Joffrey should inherit the throne or Aegon the Younger, Rhaenyra's eldest son by Daemon Targaryen. Rhaenyra's in this incredibly weird position where she's kind of become Aegon the Conqueror because the Conqueror had 2 marriages and children via both of them. But his son with his younger bride was older than his son with his older wife, and so he was named heir to the throne. Then, when he died, Maegor went to war with his brother Aenys' son because his mother claimed the throne had always been his rightfully. Having children from 2 branches always leads to complications, and the dance itself is a direct consequence of this. Viserys' first line goes to war with his second over the question of legitimacy, and because Joff is a bastard, he's already at a disadvantage there. That's not even mentioning the fact that Rhaenyra's initial refusal to name Alan and Adam Valerians means that Joff will also inherit Driftmark until Rhaenyra changes her mind, when he shouldn't be an heir to anything. This explosive situation, where 2 sets of siblings compete with one another, would have played out inevitably irrespective of what Rhaenyra did, as long as her remaining sons survived. So even if Jace, Luke, and Joff were legitimate heirs, their succession would never truly be secure, because Daemon would essentially become Alicent at that point and Lander's ghost, Rhaenyra. This isn't spoken of nearly enough by the show, but we're pretty sure that there are many lords in the books who use this specific rationale to justify joining the Greens, who had a much clearer line of succession. Couple this with her final fatal flaw, and you'll realize that her entire character arc was set up for a downfall from the beginning. Rhaenyra Targaryen was never going to succeed because she never thought beyond her immediate objectives. In the end, her faction wins the war, but it's Aegon who takes the throne, and it's through him that the lineage of the Iron Throne is traced. While Rhaenyra's followers remain loyal to her side, they would have found themselves favoring the Greens had the Queen lived for too long. In the end, Rhaenyra's stubbornness proves to be her undoing, because she's told to retreat to the Vale where she would be better protected, but she chooses to press on to Dragonstone. Bartimaeus Celtigar isn't the only counselor whose face she's slapped in the past, though the others' cheeks were only metaphorically red. She doesn't stop to think that the very people she's left behind might end up turning against her, and we already know that Sir Alfred Broom is going to betray her. The show has foreshadowed Rhaenyra's rise and fall through visions quite explicitly, but prophecy alone doesn't run this world. Her own actions and lack thereof shaped her downfall, and even if you divorce her from the prince who was promised prophecy, Rhaenyra would have likely ended up in the same position. The books don't allude to that storyline, and yet she ends up losing anyway. So it's clear that fate alone isn't a factor in her downfall. Rhaenyra herself was woefully underprepared to assume the responsibility of becoming queen, and we hope everything we've discussed today makes that clear to you guys as well. Having said all that, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And be sure to like the video, share the video, subscribe to our channel, and ring that notification bell for more dragon content. We'll see you guys real soon with yet another video. So until then, stay safe, have a great day,